I can't remember all the questions that were there, but I would say that people that are on the extremes of both sides are a little nuts. I would hate to have all hydrocarbons banned in 3 years, you wouldn't want a world, it wouldn't work. And on the other hand, what's happening will be adapted to over time, just as we've adapted to all kinds of things. I do not think, I'm interested in a quote from 1997, because we've talked about this before. We have no problem owning Costco or Walmart, and a substantial number of their stores, and they sell cigarettes. It's a big item. It's something that brings people in. They know the price of cigarettes, and they put them up front, and so we don't. It's a very tough situation. We made that decision a long time ago when we went to Memphis, and we looked at a business that was a very, very good business, and it was much less harmful, at least from everything I could find out. It was much less harmful than smoking tobacco, chewing tobacco was. And these were decent people, and they were running a legal business, and they all chewed tobacco themselves. So they told me that their mother was 100 and chewing tobacco and all these things. But Charlie and I did go down in the lobby of that hotel, and we just said to ourselves, this is probably the best business we've ever seen. And I called my then son-in-law, Alan Greenberg, and he'd studied chewing tobacco and its effects when he was working for a native-related organization, and we decided not to do it. But would we? I used to see ads in our paper from financial companies where I knew they were terrible. And it's a very tough thing to decide whether you get in or out of a business. And it's a very tough time to decide what companies benefit society more than others. I mean, I don't know whether. I think Chevron's benefited society in all kinds of ways, and I think it continues to do so, and I think we're going to need a lot of hydrocarbons for a long time, and we'll be very glad we've got them. But I do think that the world's moving away from them, too, and that could change. I don't like making the moral judgments on stocks in terms of actually running the businesses, but there's something about every business that if you knew what you wouldn't like. Meat packers or anything. Have you ever gone through a meat packing? If you expect perfection, in your spouse or in your friends or in companies, you're not going to find it. And what you elect to do yourself, if you own an index fund, you're going to own Chevron. And believe me, Chevron is not an evil company in the least. and I have no compunction about owning, in the least, about owning Chevron. And if we owned the entire business, I would not feel uncomfortable about being in that business. Charlie?
Well, I agree. You can imagine two things. A young man marries into your family. He's a English professor at, say, Swarthmore, or he works for Chevron. Which would you pick? Because I don't see. I want to admit I'd take the guy from Chevron.
Well, I hope your daughters agree with you. We're doing a lot in oil. I don't see us getting self-sufficient in oil, but gas is huge. Our picture has changed a lot in the last 3 years in terms of energy. Now, Charlie and I might argue that over time we'd still be better off using somebody else's up and keeping our own for a long time.
That's my view.
Yeah, for a long time. We were an oil exporter in my lifetime, a substantial oil exporter, and might have been better if we'd been using Saudi.
It would have been better.
Yeah. You can't get by with Charlie here. It would have been better. Okay, it would have been better if we had been using Saudi Arabia's oil then and just, in effect, treated all of this huge reserves we had in places like East Texas and such as a strategic petroleum reserve, which we just kept around for another century. But
it would have been much better.
Yeah, it would have. But our picture has changed for the better, and that means our current account deficit picture has changed for the better. We've still got a ways to go, but it does look better than 3 or 4 years ago. Don't you think so, Charlie?
Well, I think that's a very complex interaction. My view is that the single most precious resource of the United States are its hydrocarbon reserves, the ones that are right here. And of course, I want to use up, and I'm a Puritan. I always want to suffer now to make the future better, because I think that's the way grown-ups should behave. And so I'm all for using up the other fellow's oil and conserving our own. And I think the idea of energy independence is one of the stupidest ideas I've ever heard grown people talk about. Think of what terrible shape we'd been if we'd achieved total energy independence way earlier. We wouldn't have any oil and gas left at all. Wouldn't that be a wonderful condition? We don't want energy independence. We want to conserve this stuff. And thank God other people have some of this precious stuff they're willing to sell. I have the exact opposite idea on this subject from most people. And of course, I think I'm right.
This is Charlie's version of saving up sex for your old age. You know.
No, we're going to use the oil.
We're depleting our strategic oil reserves. Should the United States be doing something differently, and do you see consequences to these actions in the next 10 years if we do not become more proactive?
Well, Charlie's the expert on oil.
Well, that
Only compared to me.
Samuel Johnson said it's hard to determine the order of precedency between a louse and a flea. It's hard to tell which of us is more incompetent in oil.
Yeah, we're still competing.
I have a different view on this subject. I like having big reserves of oil. If I were running the benevolent despot of the United States, I would just leave most of the oil we have here, and I'd pay whatever the Arabs charge for their oil, and I'd pay it cheerfully and conserve my own. I think it's going to be very precious stuff over the next 200 years. And nobody else has my view, so it doesn't bother me. I just think they're all wrong.
Yeah. Well,
but at any rate, that is not the normal view.
and we've been pretty flexible in our own view. I mean, actually, the federal government is serving up however many billion barrels of the stuff that into the economy, and it wasn't that long ago that the idea that anybody produced a barrel of oil was somehow something terrible. I mean, just try doing without 11 million barrels a day and see what happens tomorrow. It is something that everybody has a feeling on immediately, and this gets into a whole bunch of different tribes of sorts, and you offend an awful lot of people if you talk in any way about it. But in the end, I think, at the moment at least, most people feel that it's nice to have some oil in this country than not have it, and we're using a lot of it. And if we were to try and change over in 3 years or 5 years, nobody knows what would happen, but the odds that it would work well are extremely low, it seems to me. Charlie, why don't you say something more dramatic so you'll be the one that offended the most people?
Well, if you stop to think about it, the oil industry is being so vilified now. I can hardly think of a more useful industry, and I don't know about wildcatters, but certainly the petroleum engineers I know, and the people who design our oil refineries and pipelines are some of the finest and most reliable people I know. And I see very little trouble with the oil supply thing in the United States. So I'm basically in love with Standard Oil. And I don't have this feeling that it's an evil, crazy place. I wish the rest of the world worked as well as our big oil companies.